that's what we don't want to happen. Greece is allowing time to make that decision. And we're at 100%. They're at 152%. We're at 100. And the years are clicking off. There's a time where we cannot sustain this borrowing. And because of that, I think the pressure is saying we got to do something now. And I believe something will happen.
There's a lot of people trying to sell gold these days who are saying you must buy gold because eventually people are going to lose faith in the dollar, that the rest of the world will not invest in dollars. Do you think that day's coming? Do you believe that could happen, or is that just a sales pitch?
I believe that because of what I just told you, that we can preclude that day from happening. But if we don't do something, something will happen. I don't think anyone knows because we've never been down that path. But whatever it is, I know it's going to be bad.
Okay, that's fair enough. Let's talk about, speaking of bad, let's talk about foreclosures. We've been having that lingering problem here in Florida for many years now. You seek a private sector solution, or you seek mediation, or where do we go from there? Where do we take the families in Florida who've been hurting on this issue for years? What do we do?
Well, I think the real problem is this. There was an overextension of borrowing credit for people who potentially could not pay for something that ended up being overpriced. And so there was a time frame there, especially from, let's say, 2004 to 2007, maybe even a little bit before that, when property values were going up, but there was nothing really there underneath them to say that really should happen. And then people were borrowing right on the edge of how much they could afford. So jobs lost, or even if you have a job, it's been flat as far as the income. You haven't had these huge raises or anything like that. Many lost their jobs. And if you borrow right on the edge and your property value goes down, there's lots of pressure on banks to make that money good, for you to pay up for the part that you're missing. And that's happened not only in residential but commercial. So there's a problem. I think the solution is a solution that cannot be borne by the federal government. I mean, for them to just come in and bail people out, I don't think taking taking our citizens' money and apply it to those who may have borrowed unwisely or gotten themselves in a situation like that. I just don't think that's the right thing to do. On the other hand, I think there is help. And I believe that we can spread out the impact. Here's one thought, and I thought it was one of the better bills that were filed. Bill Posey is a member from over in the coast, the East Coast. He sponsored a bill that basically said if someone is keeping up with their payments, even though their mortgage is upside down, even though the property's not valued, the regulators of the banks can't come into that bank and say, well, you're going to have to say that's a bad loan, but even though they're paying, that's a bad loan, and you're going to go out and have to capitalize that and find money in order to cover that bad loan. That's wrong. You know, if they're making the payments, even if it is underwater, it doesn't matter. And to me, that's it. The other is there is a part to this that says we ought to negotiate. And I've worked with a lot of people who have come into our office about renegotiating and working out something that could be beneficial. It's not beneficial for people to be foreclosed on. It can't be.
Right. Hurts everybody.
So if we could come to some sort of mediated agreement between the two parties and say, okay, everybody loses a little bit, but we still you still keep the house and you still keep making payments, and they might be a little bit lower. That to me, that's the key.
Interesting. All right, Congressman Webster, quick commercial break. We'll be right back. Continue our discussion with Congressman Daniel Webster, a Republican from Central Florida running for re-election District 8. And you've had an interesting time lately, feedback from some of your constituents about a federal government program. It's sort of an extension of the census that asks some really personal questions. And what are you hearing from folks, and what are the thoughts on that?
Well, it's called the American Community Survey,
Okay,
American
yeah.
Community Survey,
Got it.
ACS. And that survey is an extension of the census. It's not the census. That happened. That's why we got 2 new congressional seats and all of
Right.
that we counted the people. That's what they're supposed to do.
We answered those questions.
But over the 10 years, every 200,000 people a month get a survey. And it's a big, thick survey, bunch of questions, all intrusive, and they make you answer them. So,
You have to answer them, right?
So yes. So yeah, they'll send them to you. Then they'll call a couple of times. You don't do that. They'll sit on your doorstep
Yeah.
and tell you, which is true, they can fine you up to $5,000 if you don't fill this form out. So there are questions like, do you have problems thinking? Do you have problems remembering? How much money do you make? How much money do you make in dividends? If you have agriculture property, how much do you make off of that? Do you have a flushing toilet? I mean, it's things that...
I hope so.
Yeah, I know. It's just things you don't... doesn't need to be asked, and it's certainly not the government's role. There's 5,779 people that do that. Costs $70 per survey.
Of tax dollars.
Of tax
Costs
dollars.
us money for them to do that.
$2.4 billion over the 10-year period of time that they're going to be doing this. And so what I did was sponsor an amendment to the budget that just says they can't spend money on that anymore. It's not going to be used for that. And really, though, I put this up on a web page that has you cut. And there's several issues on there, and the public could vote on which one they would cut. 86% voted that's the one
That was a no-brainer.
Yes.
Even Congress could figure this one out.
Yes.
Forgive me. All right, let's talk about your opponent, likely opponent in November, Val Demings, former police chief of Orlando, running as a Democrat, a newcomer to politics. So how are you going to survive the challenge? What's the strategy? What's the difference? If people are watching and they don't know you two that well, why should they pick you instead of Val Demings?
Well, I think that good policy makes good politics, and I believe I've stuck up for good policy. Some of them are tough votes, trying to get us on a course that will eventually balance our budget, trying to bring into control things that are just too much for the federal government to be doing. And so I've done that, and I believe I've had a successful career. I've also tried to build bridges between the Republicans and Democrats, which I was successful doing when I was in the state legislature. I've got a lot of legislative experience, and in the end, though, I think it boils down to philosophy. We had 2 to 4 years of Democrat control in the Congress. And so to have Nancy Pelosi back as Speaker is just something I can't imagine. And yet that's where we'd be headed in one hand. On the other hand, if we remain in control and I remain elected, then I think we have a much better process. Things that are just not talked about. Number one, under Nancy Pelosi, remember she said, we'll let you know what's in the bill. You can read it after you pass it, after you vote for it. There were no amendments on any bills offered under her reign in the last Congress. None of the members, Democrat or Republican, could offer amendments to bills on the floor of the House. And that's all changed. And we've opened up the process, and we said, no, people should be able to offer amendments. It's up to them to go get the votes for them, but they ought to be able to offer them. And no, you get 3 days to read the bills before you ever have to consider them. And those are the kind of things I think we have to stick with. If we go back to the old way, the Nancy Pelosi way, which is where we'd be headed if we change course here, I think we'd be doing ourselves a disservice.
All right, one last question before we let you go. Sometime this month, relatively soon, the U.S. Supreme Court will rule on what some folks call Obamacare and others call the National Affordable Health Care Act. What do you think? What are you watching?
We'll see what they do. I think there's 3 choices. They could maintain as constitutional the law. They could take down the mandate that makes everyone purchase a policy, or they could take the entire thing down.
And even if you just take the mandate away, the larger thing doesn't work.
It doesn't. A matter of fact, it's probably the most complicated if they only take part of it away. If they leave it, we know what it is. If they get rid of it, we know what they got rid of. If they stay in the middle, there are components that were depending on that mandate.
A larger pool
Yes.
paying into the system.
Yeah, but not only that, they're shutting down programs that would be unnecessary if everyone is insured. So when they shut down the disproportionate share to hospitals or the low-income pool or other things that are funding mechanisms that won't be needed because everyone will be covered, that's going to cause all kinds of chaos.
Wow. So it's going to be interesting to see.
It will.
All right. Congressman Daniel Webster, I appreciate your time this Saturday morning. It's always a pleasure to sit down with you for almost a half hour.